Hi there. You're standing on the walls of Troy, and you're no longer sure what you fear more, the thunder of the approaching Greek ships, or the dead indifference of your own familiar walls. Legends promise heroism and glory, but in reality, you're met only by a weary city, where the bread is harder than stone. Fear has long turned into boredom, and the gods have become silent spectators to someone else's agony. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I'm really curious to see who's joined us. Now, get comfortable. We're starting. You stand upon the walls of Troy, and it is not exactly how poets describe it. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer banality of ancient masonry. These stones, these age old bricks, are not shining with the golden dust of legend, nor do they echo with the proud steps of mythical kings. No, what you notice instead is that the mortar between the stones has been patched so many times that it looks like the handiwork of an indecisive baker, uncertain how much flour to mix in, and worried it will all fall apart by next winter. And for good reason. Most of the repairs, you recall, were never actually done for any upcoming war, but for the much more mundane business of keeping the livestock inside the city at night. Cows are surprisingly creative escape artists when properly motivated, and, as every sensible Troy citizen knows, a goat with a grudge is far more dangerous than a Mycenaean with a spear. As you stare out over the flat, dusty plain that separates Troy from the sea, your mind drifts, not toward heroic defense, but toward the sheer inconvenience of being on night watch duty. There are rules, of course. Ancient tradition demands that someone must always be on the walls, even when the only thing to be seen is the moon's reflection off distant puddles. Tonight, though, you see something else. Tiny dots, moving slowly, as though even they cannot summon up the enthusiasm for the task at hand. It is a long standing fact in Troy that whenever trouble arrives, the walls are the worst place to be. When there is no trouble, the walls are a magnet for every tedious citizen, especially those who love to discuss stonework. You have heard, more times than you can count, how the very first wall was not built by heroes, but by a foreman named Alcides, whose chief skill was in persuading people to haul stones for no pay on the promise of eternal glory. It was, so the story goes, a dull and dusty affair, though Alcides' grandson, currently serving as your captain, would prefer you forget that part. Tonight, with the rumor of Greek ships swirling through the city, the walls are not so crowded. Most Trojans prefer to keep their distance when anything like real danger threatens. That is another fact of ancient life, seldom mentioned in epic verse. The best time for wall maintenance is peacetime, and the best time for wall gossip is during festivals. As you pace, your mind catalogs 100 repairs that need doing: loose stones, cracks, suspicious stains, and you make a mental note to suggest, if you survive, that next year's festival should be the Festival of Patching Holes. Beyond the immediate, practical worries, there is another fact, less visible but more oppressive. The walls are not just stones, they are an entire ecosystem. Generations of birds have claimed corners for their nests. Rats, fat and arrogant, have tunneled passages known only to themselves and, possibly, the oldest of the guards, who regard them with resigned respect. The cats of Troy, meanwhile, have organized themselves into silent cabals, meeting at night atop the tallest battlements, plotting schemes of their own. If only the city's defenders could muster such discipline. For now, you try not to look down at the street below. There, in the flickering lamplight, the last few revelers from yesterday's feast are singing off key, and an elderly man is lecturing anyone who will listen about the superiority of Trojan olive oil. Above it all, you are expected to stand vigilant, eyes trained on the sea, as though you might spot the hand of destiny itself. In reality, you mostly see darkness, occasional flashes of lightning on the horizon, and now those small, persistent dots slowly drawing closer. It is a fact lost to most chroniclers, but no one on the wall ever truly knows what is coming until it is too late. The ancient stones remember more than the people do. They have been battered by storms, chipped by would-be sculptors, painted with children's drawings during times of peace, and scrubbed clean by generations of anxious hands awaiting an enemy. In the cracks and chips, you see not the story of glory, but of an endless, grinding persistence. And so, as you lean on your spear, you contemplate the real legacy of Troy's walls. Not defiance, not glory, but an unending, mostly thankless routine, patched together stone by stone, story by story, and watch by watch. The Greeks are coming, yes, but before that, there will be meetings about supplies, debates about wall thickness, and, if you are unlucky, another speech from Alcides' grandson. If only the poets knew. The most heroic thing about these walls is that they have survived centuries of Trojans, not Greeks. You listen, you really listen, and it is hard to imagine that the simple act of hearing can be so exhausting. It is a curious fact of life in Troy that your ears, not your eyes, are your main defense against the world. After all, the plain that stretches before the city is a long, undulating sheet of dust and brittle grass, offering little cover to anyone or anything wishing to sneak up on you. Yet somehow, the Greeks always find a way to be noisier than expected. Tonight, as you strain your senses, you catch the unmistakable sound of the sea, an ancient, patient rhythm that would lull you to sleep on any other night. But woven into this lullaby are unfamiliar notes. The distant clatter of wooden hulls jostling, the slap of ropes against masts, the gruff voices of sailors, shouting orders you cannot quite make out. It is not the melodious Greek from the mouths of bards, but a cacophony of regional dialects, profanity, and sheer frustration. There is an unspoken truth among those who man Troy's walls. Greek ships are, by any reasonable standard, astonishingly loud. Poets may call their fleet a forest of masts, or the pride of Argos, but you suspect that the gods must have been half deaf to bless such a racket. It turns out that ancient war galleys are the wooden equivalent of a drunken brawl in a pottery market. Every rower's oar groans with effort, Every plank complains, and somewhere in the distance, a man is cursing a stubborn sail as though the entire war depends on its compliance. He is probably right in his own way. You remember a fact that your uncle, a veteran of many failed fishing expeditions, once shared with you. The sea, he said, has only one true master: bad weather. Everything else is just floating carpentry. As you listen to the approaching chaos, you realize that the Greeks have yet to master even floating carpentry. Their vessels sound ready to fall apart at any moment, and you wonder if half of them will make it to shore or simply disintegrate in a fit of existential despair. Curious thing, really, how the most celebrated armada in history is, in fact, a floating disaster. Poets never mention the reality: wet, shivering men, each with a unique talent for complaining, packed tighter than pickled fish in a market barrel. The official records might say 1,000 ships, but you suspect that the real miracle is that even half of them manage to keep their prows pointed in the same direction. You hear it all: the laughter, the cursing, the occasional off key singing that drifts across the water as the night breeze changes. For a brief, mad moment, you wonder if the Greeks are about to invade or just host a poorly organized festival by the shore. It is hard to imagine the terror of war when your enemies sound like they are losing an argument with their own equipment. Yet there is something else, too: a sense of rhythm buried deep beneath the chaos. These men, for all their noise, are moving with purpose. The ships creak and sway in time with their rowing, a dull, steady heartbeat that grows louder as the minutes pass. You know, with a sinking certainty that soon the racket will transform into order, if not for the Greeks, then certainly for you and your fellow Trojans. It is here, standing watch as the sounds grow nearer, that you realize how little separates fear from boredom. For hours, your only companions have been the ceaseless wind, the distant cries of seabirds, and the memories of half forgotten songs your mother used to sing. Now you are joined by the arrival of the world's most poorly rehearsed orchestra, determined to shatter the last illusions of peace. There is a peculiar solidarity among those who listen for danger. You and your comrades compare notes. Is that thunder or the grumble of a Greek admiral? Did you hear shouting, or was it just the wind? Nobody is certain. Even your captain, Alcides' ever anxious grandson, pretends to recognize the meaning of every faint sound, but you know he is just as lost as the rest. It is at this moment that another, more personal truth surfaces. Sailors, regardless of nationality, are all the same. The only real difference between a Greek oarsman and a Trojan fisherman is the choice of language when swearing at the elements. Both will blame the gods, the weather, and their immediate superiors for every inconvenience. It is a detail the bards would do well to remember. As you lean forward, straining to separate noise from meaning, you try to picture the men behind those voices. Heroes, supposedly, future legends, immortalized in marble and song. But for now, they are tired, wet, hungry, and desperately in need of a bath. Some will live to have epic poetry recited in their name. Most will be remembered only for a single ill timed sneeze or an argument with a stubborn tiller. The wind shifts. For a moment, the sound grows sharper, closer. You can almost make out the words, and it is not the language of myth, but of shipboard survival. Pull, you wretched lot, someone bellows, followed by a string of expletives you could only wish were more creative. A second voice, higher and more desperate, shouts about a lost sandal. Somewhere, someone is definitely crying. There are no speeches, no calls to glory, just a symphony of chaos. And all the while, you are left with your duty to listen, to try to divine meaning from the noise, and to wonder, not for the first time, how much longer the world can balance on the edge between farce and tragedy. The sea is not the only thing that speaks at night. Your own thoughts, amplified by the darkness, begin to murmur as well. What is it that you are really defending? Stones and memories, the pride of men who will never climb these walls again? Or is it something more basic, a desire for quiet, for order, for the world to make sense again, if only for a moment? The answer does not come. Instead, the noise grows louder, a swelling tide of confusion, fear, and anticipation. The Greeks are coming, and you, standing on these battered stones, are left with nothing but your own ears, your own doubts, and the sneaking suspicion that, when the time comes, nobody will remember just how loud it all was. The sun is still a red smudge over the Aegean, and already the horizon crawls with the vague suggestion of menace. You blink, then blink again, and squint so hard your forehead aches, but the sight does not resolve into anything impressive. No white sails gleaming, no banners snapping triumphantly in the wind. Instead, you see what looks like a flock of exhausted seabirds, wings folded, clinging to the surface of the water. It takes a moment to realize that this is, in fact, the great Greek fleet, the terror of all Asia Minor, creaking and stumbling closer at the speed of an aging ox. You find yourself counting the ships, as if your gaze alone could keep them from multiplying. In the old stories, the Greek fleet is 1,000 strong, which sounds impressive until you consider that the average Greek ship carries barely 50 men and leaks in 3 different places. The epic poets forget to mention this, of course. They are more interested in the word thousand than in the more prosaic details, how the ships look after weeks at sea, how the paint peels and the hulls creak, how the sailors grumble about the food and the gods in equal measure. Fact, not one of these ships would pass the inspection of a modern harbor master. The hulls are stitched together from mismatched timbers, patched and repatched with tar, scraps of hide, and the occasional prayer. The sails sag like tired laundry, more gray than white, mottled by ancient wine stains and unidentifiable blotches. Every mast leans at its own angle, and the whole flotilla seems to drift more than it sails, as if even the wind is too embarrassed to lend its strength to this parade. As the first ranks of ships crawl into clearer view, you notice the crews, not armored heroes gleaming in the morning light, but skinny, sunburned men too busy squabbling over rowing order to look heroic. There is more shouting than singing, more confusion than order. Some ships are out of formation, drifting sideways or trailing behind. A few oars splash uselessly, out of sync, while the helmsmen argue over who should have packed extra water. In one vessel, you spot two men wrestling over a stolen cloak. The avenging sons of Atreus look, for all the world, like a band of merchants late for market. It is a peculiar sensation watching your supposed doom arrive in such an unimpressive fashion. You feel, not fear, but something dangerously close to amusement. The city's sentries squint along the wall, exchanging wry glances. If this is the flower of Greek manhood, perhaps Troy is in less danger than you thought. But then you remember what you are meant to do. Stand to attention, look vigilant, show no sign of weakness. The captain's son, Alcides' pale and anxious grandson, paces behind you, making a great show of squinting into the sun and muttering about enemy discipline and the need for vigilance. You wonder if he even sees the same ships you do. Fact, the first arrival of an enemy fleet is always more farce than threat. You have heard your elders talk about the last great raid, how the invaders landed in a flurry of curses, tripped over their own ropes, and nearly drowned themselves trying to wade ashore. No one died that day except for a single goat caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her memory is honored more than most fallen warriors. Your gaze shifts to the city below, where merchants are already setting up shop in expectation of brisk trade. Nothing motivates commerce quite like an impending siege. Bread prices have tripled, and rumor has it that one baker is charging double for heroic loaves, baked in the shape of shields, though they taste of old barley and regret. The city buzzes with anticipation, not fear. After all, what is war but another market day, only with more shouting and fewer sales? Another fact: siege warfare is about patience, not glory. For every poet's tale of heroism, there are 100 days of nothing at all. The most dangerous weapon in a besieger's arsenal is not the battering ram, but the boredom that seeps into every crack of daily life. As you watch the Greeks approach, you realize that your real enemy may not be the foreign ships at all, but the endless tedium waiting on the other side of the walls. Still, it would be unwise to underestimate a desperate crowd. The ships creep closer, and their disorder slowly gives way to determination. The shouting quiets, the rows straighten, and the prows point unerringly toward Troy. Behind the comedy is a purpose you cannot ignore. 1,000, or let us say several hundred, men, driven by the promise of loot, glory, or simply an escape from their own lives. Men with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous kind. A gull screeches overhead, and the sentries tense. The first ship nudges the sand, its crew tumbling over themselves in a scramble to disembark. Shields are dropped, curses fly, but slowly, inexorably, the beach fills with armed men. The captains, taller, cleaner, less exhausted, step out and begin to bark orders, snapping their men into makeshift lines. This is the moment the poets love. The instant chaos sharpens into threat. You watch as the Greek leaders plant their banners in the sand, their emblems barely visible through layers of grime. One flag, caught by the wind, unfurls and promptly collapses. Someone picks it up, straightens it, and stabs it into the ground with theatrical finality. Fact: not a single one of those banners will survive the first serious thunderstorm. The real symbol of an army is not its colors, but its capacity to endure all manner of indignity. On this count, you suspect, the Greeks may be formidable indeed. As the last ships come in, the city's mood shifts. Below, mothers herd their children inside, merchants close their stalls, and the chatter dies away. Even the birds grow quiet. For a heartbeat, the only sound is the relentless, uneven pounding of oars on water, the deep, collective sigh of an army that has finally arrived at its destination. You realize, with a jolt, that you are witnessing the opening scene of a legend. But up here, on the battered walls of Troy, it feels less like the dawn of an epic and more like the beginning of another long, dusty chapter in the city's endless struggle to stay awake. The ships are here. The war, whatever shape it will take, is about to begin. You are ready, not for heroics, but for the stubborn, sleepless waiting that makes legends possible. And as the Greek army stumbles ashore, you cannot help but wonder how many of them, given the chance, would trade all the glory in the world for a single unbroken night of sleep. You look out over the gathering enemy on the beach, and for a moment, you try to make sense of them. The Greeks, the Hellenes, the Achaeans, Argives, Danans, sons of Hellas, children of Zeus, heirs to a dozen squabbling gods, and perhaps twice as many quarrelsome chieftains. What the epic poets never say, because it would make their job twice as hard, is that the Greeks are less a nation and more a collection of ill matched cousins forced to spend the summer together, each convinced that he alone knows how to run the family farm. You remember the first time you saw a Greek trader in the city market. He was not some hero in shining bronze, but a short, sunburnt man with an accent thick as sour wine. He tried to cheat your mother on a basket of figs. When caught, he shrugged, grinned, and offered a charm against seasickness as apology. Your mother laughed and took the charm anyway, and you learned then that the Greeks are, above all, resourceful. Now, as their army crawls onto your beach, you see the full range of their unity. There are men with long, oiled hair from Sparta, rough fishermen from the Cyclades, who smell of old salt, proud lords from Mycenae, still telling anyone who will listen that their walls are higher than yours, clever-eyed Ithacans, whose first question to any stranger is, "What can I sell you?" and grumbling Boeotians, who seem disappointed to have survived the journey at all. It is an open secret that none of them trusts the others. There have already been fights on the beach, and the war has not yet started. One captain claims that the leader of the Mycenaeans, Agamemnon, is only here for the loot. Another mutters that Odysseus of Ithaca cannot be trusted. He smiles too easily, and his men vanish at night on mysterious errands. The Thessalians keep to themselves, muttering darkly about a prophecy, and the Arcadians are still looking for their missing goats. You listen to the gossip of the walls. Everyone claims the Greeks are united under one king, but even the simplest soldier knows better. For the Greeks, every meal is a council of war, every water barrel a new parliament, and every campfire a scene of negotiation. There are more disputes over whose turn it is to cook than over battle plans. The only thing they seem to agree on is that, whatever happens, it is someone else's fault. Fact: in every alliance, the most dangerous people are not the enemies, but the allies. The Mycenaeans, with their lion crested shields and polished manners, look down on the rest. The Spartans boast about their discipline, but you have seen more discipline among Troy's alley cats. The islanders are more interested in salvage than siegecraft. The Thessalians are famous for their horses, but bring only stories and complaints about sand in their boots. It is a miracle they made it this far. You remember your own city's council and cannot help but laugh. If Troy can barely agree on the best route to the well, what hope do the Greeks have of organizing a siege? And yet, as history proves again and again, nothing is more dangerous than a collection of desperate men with a common enemy and nothing better to do. Among the Greeks, one group inspires the least trust, those from Mycenae. Even among Greeks, the Mycenaeans are renowned for changing sides at the first hint of profit. The saying goes that a Mycenaean handshake is worth half a promise and twice the trouble. Their captains smile broadly, but their men keep their daggers close, eyes scanning for opportunity. The Trojans whisper that it will be a Mycenaean who opens the city gates, not a Greek hero in shining armor. Fact: none of the Greeks calls himself a Greek. Each identifies by city or island, by clan, by ancestor. There is no Greek language, only a tangle of dialects and gestures, so that even their orders sound like negotiations. You wonder how they manage to understand each other at all. Perhaps that is why their fleet took so long to arrive. Half the time was spent arguing about directions, the other half explaining what left means. As you watch them set up their ragged camp, you notice their peculiar rituals. Some build small altars of sand and pebbles, offering a bit of bread or fish to whichever god they hope is listening. Others carve their names into driftwood or sit in circles, dicing for luck. A few attempt to organize a formal parade, but within minutes it descends into chaos as men trip over shields and dogs chase after the messengers. At night, the beach glows with fires, each flickering circle a separate world. You hear songs, some mournful, some boasting, some so ribald you wonder if the gods might strike them down in disgust. Laughter, curses, shouts, arguments about wine and women, about whose home is grander, whose king is braver. For a while, it sounds almost festive, a motley encampment more suited to a festival than a war. The only thing missing is the scent of roasting lamb. Yet beneath the chaos, there is steel. For all their differences, the Greeks have come here for one thing, and one thing only: Troy's destruction. You sense it in their posture, their glances at the city's proud towers, the way their captains meet each other's eyes. Rivals, yes, but partners for now. The night wears on, and the songs die out, replaced by the murmurs of sleepless men staring at your walls. You realize, with a shiver, that whatever else they may be, the Greeks are here to stay. They may bicker, cheat, boast, and curse each other, but the thing that unites them, the prospect of your city's fall, is enough. Sometimes you think the greatest threat comes not from the enemy you fear, but from the unlikely alliance you never truly understand. And as the first pale fingers of dawn touch the masts and banners, you wonder, when the story is told, will anyone remember just how little these Greeks resembled the heroes of legend, or how much more dangerous in their disarray they really were? You have heard it said that in times of danger, time itself moves strangely. Minutes stretch, hours contract, whole days collapse into a single heartbeat or unwind into endless, sluggish scrolls of nothing at all. Whoever said that, you suspect, has never lived in Troy during a siege. Here, time is not so much elastic as it is stubbornly immovable, like a mule that refuses to budge. You find yourself measuring the hours, not by the progress of battle or the movement of the sun, but by the slow, relentless accumulation of routine. You begin the morning on the walls, just as you did the morning before and the one before that. Your life is measured in small rituals. Check the cracks in the stones, greet the other sentries, complain about the bread, squint at the Greeks assembling their breakfast fires. There is a peculiar comfort in this monotony, a steady heartbeat beneath the anxiety of war. After all, the city has not yet fallen, and you are still alive, a fact that deserves at least a little celebration, even if it is only in the form of a second stale roll of bread. The city below is caught in its own slow dance with time. In the marketplace, vendors hawk their goods with the same forced enthusiasm as yesterday and the day before, each one careful to keep an eye on the gate in case they must pack up and flee. The old women gossip at the well, discussing the latest rumors about Greek atrocities, lost sons, and which quarter of the city is safest during a bombardment. Children chase a stray dog through the dusty streets, oblivious to the doom gathering outside. Somewhere, an ambitious bard tries out a new tune about Trojan valor, and the local dogs howl their disapproval. You hear the council is meeting again. They have met every day since the Greeks first appeared, and every day the discussion circles the same weary drain. Should we send envoys? Should we prepare the horses? How long can the food last? Is now the time for sacrifice or for prayer? The king's advisors take turns giving lengthy speeches about the wisdom of the ancestors, the cunning of the enemy, the fickleness of the gods. No one actually proposes a solution. Nothing, in fact, ever changes, except perhaps the length of the speeches. It is a fact rarely mentioned in heroic tales, but most of a siege is waiting, waiting for the enemy to make a move, waiting for orders that never come, waiting for your turn at the watch, for the bread to rise, for the water to boil, for the endless, circular debates of the elders to wind down. There is a particular kind of madness that sets in, bred not by fear or hunger, but by the utter sameness of every day. You find yourself longing for excitement, even danger, if only to break the spell. In this slow time, rumors become currency. You hear that the Greeks are preparing a night attack, or a surprise landing up the coast, or a secret alliance with your own king's cousin's nephew. Each new rumor sparks a flurry of speculation, argument, and inevitably boredom. Nothing comes of it. The Greeks remain on their beach, building fires, sharpening swords, arguing about rations. The Trojans remain on their walls, scanning the horizon for movement, swapping stories, muttering curses at the wind. You recall a local saying: in Troy, there are only two times, the time before the war and the time during the war. The time after the war, nobody speaks of. It is as if the very notion is forbidden or simply unimaginable. Life has become so entwined with the siege that you cannot remember what it was like to walk the streets without glancing nervously at the gate, or to eat a meal without wondering if it will be your last. Another fact: for every day of dramatic action in a siege, there are 100 days of slow, grinding inertia. The poets may celebrate the glorious charge or the desperate defense, but they never mention the endless afternoons spent repairing sandals or the sleepless nights listening to the snoring of your fellow guards. These are the moments that truly wear a person down, not the fear of death, but the sheer monotony of survival. Time moves differently for everyone. For the young, it drags unbearably, every hour a wasted opportunity for adventure. For the old, it moves too quickly, each sunrise a reminder that there may not be many left. For the warriors on the wall, it is a rope, stretched taut and fraying at the edges, threatening to snap at any moment. For the council, it is a resource to be managed, hoarded, and spent carefully, as if they could delay fate by talking a little longer. You begin to understand why people turn to prophecy in such times. When the future is a blank wall, it is tempting to believe that somewhere someone knows what comes next. The priests offer vague pronouncements. A great darkness will come from the sea. The horse will betray the city. Beware the wrath of Athena. And the people nod solemnly, as if these words offer any guidance at all. It is less about knowing the future and more about filling the silence with something, anything, other than the dull thrum of passing time. You hear someone joke that the real enemy is not the Greeks, but the clock. Every hour they do nothing, the city's nerves fray a little more. Children grow restless, old feuds reignite, tempers flare over the smallest insult. A spilled drink becomes an omen, a late delivery of grain, a sign of doom. The baker down the street refuses to make his famous honey cakes until the siege is lifted, a minor tragedy that becomes the subject of endless lamentation. As evening falls, the sky turns a bruised purple, and the fires of the Greek camp flicker to life on the shore. The city settles into its nightly routines: prayers, patrols, the slow, steady toll of the bell marking the hours. You find yourself on the walls once again, watching the shadows creep over the plain, listening to the distant sounds of laughter and argument from the enemy camp. It occurs to you, not for the first time, that history will remember this as a time of great deeds and fateful decisions. But for those who lived it, The real truth is far simpler and far duller. Life under siege is not a string of heroics, but an endless repetition of small tasks, small fears, small hopes, measured out day after day until even the memory of peace begins to feel like a dream you once had long ago in another life. And as you stare into the darkness, waiting for the next hour to tick by, you realize that perhaps the greatest challenge of all is not to survive the Greeks, but to endure the slow, grinding passage of time itself. You stand with your back to the city, eyes fixed on the battered parapet, and pretend, just for a moment, that you are the master of all you survey. That is what the officers always say anyway. We, the defenders of Troy, are protected by the mightiest walls and the cleverest devices of the age. It is a comforting story, repeated so often that even the most skeptical sentry starts to believe it. By the third sleepless night, but you know the truth. You have seen the cutting edge war machines of Troy. You have watched the old engineers in their dusty robes haul their treasured blueprints up the stairs, unroll them with a flourish, and then squabble for hours over which end of the catapult is supposed to face the enemy. Nothing inspires more confidence in the troops than the sight of three wise men arguing over the laws of leverage in full view of the enemy. The so called catapults, those much vaunted engines of doom, sit in lonely glory atop the walls, shrouded in mystery and pigeon droppings. Each one is a unique experiment in hubris. Some are built for range, some for power, all for confusion. The largest looks as if it was designed to launch not stones, but entire livestock. The smallest was once used in peacetime to fling baskets of fruit at wedding parties. The record for distance remains unbroken, set by a runaway wheel last spring that startled a flock of geese clear into the next village. Fact: not a single one of these machines has been used in real battle. The king's advisors insist they are a deterrent, which is a polite way of saying that nobody is quite sure how to make them work reliably. Most days, the garrison is more concerned about being hit by a stray boulder from their own side than by any missile from the Greeks. The archers, at least, have some practical experience. You watch as they fletch their arrows with meticulous care, checking each feather and testing the draw of their bows. Still, the old guard admits that most of their practice involves aiming at wayward dogs, fat pigeons, and the occasional unlucky melon. When asked if they have ever shot a Greek, the usual answer is, "Not yet, but we are hopeful." Then there are the boiling oil and pitch, the legendary weapons, promised to every nervous citizen at the first hint of danger. In reality, these supplies are guarded jealously, reserved for the most desperate moments. Everyone remembers the year a distracted cook upended a pot of oil onto the courtyard instead of the enemy, causing more casualties among the bakers than among the besiegers. Since then, the oil is kept under lock and key, and the cooks are forbidden from coming within 3 paces of the wall. You pass by the so called innovation of the year, a complicated pulley system meant to deliver fresh stones to the parapet at twice the speed. In practice, it mostly delivers rope burns and bruised fingers, and sometimes, on a good day, an actual stone. The soldiers take turns operating it, wagering on which unlucky soul will lose a sandal in the gears next. Even the youngest recruits learn quickly that progress in siege warfare is mostly a matter of avoiding the new inventions. The most reliable defense, it turns out, is the height of the walls themselves. The ancient masons who built Troy, whose names are long lost to memory, understood that a wall's true value lies not in clever contraptions, but in the simple, exhausting challenge it poses to anyone who wishes to climb it. The steps are steep, the stones are slick, and the drop on the far side is more than enough to dissuade the bravest attacker. There is a certain grim satisfaction in knowing that, after all the speeches and experiments, it is the sheer inconvenience of climbing up that will keep the Greeks at bay. Fact: most sieges are won not by genius, but by gravity. The real heroes of Troy's defenses are the stonemasons, not the inventors. You remember stories told by the oldest guards of walls, withstood not by the brilliance of engineers, but by the stubbornness of rock and mortar. Yet, for all the skepticism, there is a strange comfort in the rituals of preparation. The daily inspection of the engines, the testing of the ropes, the careful stacking of stones, all these create a sense of purpose, however illusory. You watch your comrades sharpen their blades, polish their helmets, and tell each other stories of invincible walls and miraculous devices. The old captain, his armor patched and dented, gives a speech every evening about the unbreakable spirit of Troy's defenders. Everyone nods solemnly, and no one mentions the incident with the runaway boulder. Sometimes, during a quiet hour, you find yourself daydreaming about future historians. Perhaps one day they will stand here, pointing out the remnants of ancient machines and telling awestruck listeners of the cleverness and ingenuity of their ancestors. They will speak in grave, respectful tones of the formidable defenses of Troy, and nobody will know just how much of it was wishful thinking and blind luck. You look down at your hands, calloused from endless drills and pointless repairs, and realize that, in the end, what matters is not the brilliance of the technology, but the patience of those who use it. The true art of defense lies in endurance, the ability to wait, to watch, and to keep the engines oiled and ready, just in case the improbable happens. As the sun sets, painting the city in shades of red and gold, you catch a glimpse of the Greek camp, a hive of activity and confusion. You wonder what stories they are telling about your walls, what rumors their spies will carry back to their generals. Perhaps, even now, some nervous Greek captain is explaining to his men the dangers of Troy's terrible war machines, embellishing every detail until even the pigeons are transformed into death from above. You allow yourself a small, wry smile. Let them believe what they wish. After all, sometimes the greatest defense is a good story, and in Troy, stories are in no short supply. You have heard it said that an army marches on its stomach, but whoever coined the phrase has never eaten a week-old Trojan loaf. You sit on the wall at dawn, your spear propped beside you, and inspect your morning meal, a round of bread that could double as a weapon in desperate circumstances, a dried fig that is mostly pit and a lump of goat cheese emitting the faint suggestion that it might try to walk away if left unwatched. Fact, in times of siege, taste is the first casualty. You chew slowly, jaw aching, and recall the days before the Greeks arrived, days of plump olives, dripping honey, fish pulled fresh from the river, and cakes so sweet the children fought over crumbs. Now, every meal is an act of endurance, a contest between memory and necessity. You eat because you must, not because you wish to, and every bite is a reminder that glory does not come with seasoning. You share your bread with a fellow century who studies it skeptically before attempting to break it. The crust resists like a stubborn mule, and when it finally yields, it does so with a crack that echoes down the wall. Below, a passing dog flinches. The sentry shrugs, dips the bread in water, and mutters that next time the cook should just give us bricks. There is a sort of dark humor in the garrison when it comes to rations. No one speaks of feast days anymore. The new festivals are named after whichever supply arrives unexpectedly. The Day of Fresh Onions is remembered with more reverence than the king's birthday. One evening, a crate of olives turns up, and the whole barracks rejoices. The olives are already soft, suspiciously so, but that does not matter. Anything to break the monotony of bread, cheese, and the ever present onion soup that lingers in the air like a curse. You hear complaints about the bread from every corner of the city. The bakers, once the proud architects of Troy's daily joy, are now the most cursed men in town. They claim that the flour is old, the ovens tired, the yeast rebellious. One baker insists that the siege has angered the household gods, and that is why the loaves now come out harder than the stones in the wall. Another blames the soldiers. Too many complaints spoil the dough. The rest just mutter and bake, knowing no one is really listening. But it is not just the bread. Wine, once a source of pride and pleasure, is now rationed with the strictness of gold. Every household keeps a tally, every cellar is inventoried, and the wine steward at the palace now travels with 2 guards. It is a local saying that a Trojan would sooner lose his shield than his wine. Still, as the days pass, the amphorae grow fewer, the dregs more frequent, and the jokes about vintage vinegar more bitter. Fact, the greatest fear in Troy is not famine, but spoiled wine. Bread may keep you alive, but wine keeps you human. You have seen grown men stare at the last cup in a jug as if weighing their own mortality. When a new shipment of wine arrives, there is a quiet, almost religious procession through the streets. Even the priests offer blessings, hoping to stave off the sourness that creeps in during siege. The city's rationing system is as old as the walls. Each household receives its share: grain, oil, a few onions, sometimes beans or salted fish. The richer families hoard what they can. The poor barter and beg, inventing endless ways to stretch a meal. You once traded a pair of old sandals for a handful of raisins, a deal you considered fair, though the raisins turned out to be more stem than fruit. Every evening, the fires light up across the city as families gather to eat whatever the day has brought. The talk is always the same: how much is left, how long it will last, what could be done if only the Greeks would go home. The children learn early that hunger is a game of patience and creativity. You have seen little ones turn onion skins into dolls, play, count the beans, and invent feasts from imagination alone. There are darker stories, too: whispers about grain merchants hiding stores, about bakers caught watering the flour, about cooks stealing oil to trade for news. The City Watch investigates with much fanfare and little result. You know, as everyone does, that in times of hardship, the rules of plenty are quickly forgotten. As for the soldiers, your meals are a mixture of camaraderie and complaint. The mess stewards try to rotate the menu, but variety is impossible when all the ingredients taste of dust. One day, the soup is too thin; the next, it is too thick. Someone always finds a pebble in their portion and claims it as proof of sabotage. A running joke is that you can tell the state of the siege by what is found in the soup. In the early days, it is only beans. Later, it is twigs and grass. At the end, it is hope alone. Yet, there is pride, too, in making do. The old veterans say that survival is an art, and every meal that fills the belly is a victory. You have learned to appreciate the strange comfort of sharing bad food with good friends. Sometimes, a crumb of cheese passed quietly from hand to hand means more than all the feasts of the past. As dusk falls, you finish your ration, grateful at least for the routine. Tomorrow will bring another hard loaf, another weak soup, another joke about the bakers. The Greeks may have their own troubles, but for now, you have yours. And, as any Trojan will tell you, a full stomach is all the heroism you can ask for on an ordinary day. You pace the wall and look down into Troy's winding streets, at the rooftops layered like broken pottery shards across the hill. From above, your city is a jigsaw of memories and mistakes, each block telling a story, each crumbling facade whispering secrets that even the oldest citizens have chosen to forget. The Greeks camp on the plain, sharpening their swords for glory, but within these walls, it is not war that erases. Oblivion is far older, deeper, and more insidious than any siege. There are whole districts in Troy that have not seen sunlight in years, alleys where grass pushes through the paving stones and stray dogs rule like minor gods. You pass by them sometimes on errands, careful not to linger, careful not to look too closely at the houses with their doors askew, windows broken, stairways that lead nowhere. Some buildings are little more than skeletons, fire blackened and abandoned long before the first Greek ever dreamt of war. Their origins are discussed by old women with a kind of relish. Was it the fire that came after the great festival, or perhaps a quarrel between rival merchants over a shipment of spoiled figs? Fact: half the city is already empty. War only hastens what neglect began. There are blocks that burned in the last drought and were never rebuilt, whole neighborhoods gutted by some ancient feud, their walls left to the rain and sun. Children dare each other to enter these ghostly places, chasing echoes and pigeons. You once found a shrine in a ruined house, flowers withered, offerings stale, a faded name scratched into the stone. No one remembered who had lived there, but the story lingered. Someone's grandmother, someone's uncle, a lover whose name was now dust. As the siege drags on, these abandoned quarters become a kind of silent testimony to the real pace of disaster. Not the quick catastrophe that poets love, the falling tower, the shattered gate, the last stand at the wall, but the slow, indifferent collapse that happens when people turn their backs and walk away. Every city is built on layers of dreams, of ashes, of disappointments. The ground beneath your feet is soft with forgetting. You watch the city's night patrols navigate these hollowed streets. Their torches throw long shadows that look from above like wandering ghosts. Sometimes a patrol vanishes for half an hour, reappearing with nothing but nervous laughter and the smell of wine on their breath. Rumor says that the best places to hide from duty or to meet in secret are the ruins. Everyone pretends not to know because everyone has a friend who needs a hiding place. Fact: the fires that mark Troy's history outnumber its heroes. Some fires were accidental: a spilled lamp, a careless cook, a festival gone wild. Others were deliberate. In lean years, merchants burned rival warehouses for insurance. In the dark, hungry winters, desperate families set flame to their own roofs to escape the tax collector. Each new layer of ash was swept aside, and the city limped on, forgetting, rebuilding, starting over. The city's official guides never mention these things. They lead visitors to the fresh painted temples and the king's square, skipping the ruined lanes and half built shrines. Every year, a new coat of whitewash and another statue are meant to prove that Troy is thriving, not fading. Yet anyone with eyes can see the truth. Oblivion is a slow, patient artisan carving away at the city from within. You remember how, when you were a child, you loved exploring the oldest neighborhoods, places where the ground felt soft and strange underfoot, where broken walls grew wild with morning glory and wild garlic. There was an air of freedom in these forgotten corners, a sense that the rules of the city could not reach you there. Only later did you learn that these were the places left behind, not by time, but by choice. Oblivion is not always an accident. War has changed the map, but only slightly. Now, the abandoned houses serve as hiding places for those seeking privacy or mischief. Once, a band of thieves stashed a cache of stolen grain in a ruined workshop, and it took the city watch 3 weeks to find them. Another time, a pair of lovers vanished for 2 days, only to emerge from the ashes of an old inn, eyes bright and faces smeared with soot. Everyone laughed, but no one asked whose inn it had once been. The king's advisors discuss plans to reclaim these neighborhoods, to restore them as a show of strength. But the lists grow longer each year, and the work never begins. There are always more urgent things: a breach in the wall, a missing shipment of flour, a new argument with the priests about which god deserves a festival next. The city moves forward, forgetting as it goes, leaving more and more of itself behind. Fact: for every hero Troy remembers, there are 100 names lost to the ashes. You have seen the scribes in the temple trying to record the city's lineage, scratching away at lists that grow more uncertain with every generation. The past, they say, is a great treasure, but no one can remember where it was buried. At night, you walk past the empty houses and feel a kind of kinship with them. Like you, they stand watch over the city, holding stories that will never be told. You wonder if the Greeks know how much of Troy is already gone, if they think they can destroy what has already half destroyed itself. And yet, for all the forgetting, the city endures, even as whole quarters vanish, as names are lost and stories fade. Troy clings to the hill, stubborn and battered, the walls patched and repatched against both memory and siege. Perhaps this is what it means to survive, to be built and rebuilt again, each time a little less whole, but never quite surrendered to oblivion. Another dawn, another day of nothing happening, except, of course, the official business of war: negotiation. You stand on the wall and watch the Greeks cluster around their banners, their leaders gathering beneath the largest tent, where the only real fighting seems to be over who sits closest to the wine. The city stirs in anticipation. It is an old tradition, older than the walls themselves. Before any true bloodshed, there must be parley, an exchange of words, threats, and, sometimes, gifts that are later counted and recounted as potential bribes. There is an art to it, you are told. In reality, it is little more than an excuse to delay the inevitable, to see if fate might be bargained with one last time before everyone starts dying in earnest. The messengers are chosen with as much care as if picking sacrificial victims. They must be noble, but not too noble, brave, but not reckless, skilled in words, but not so clever as to offend the enemy with irony. Your cousin's friend's uncle once went as a delegate. He returned with a black eye and a basket of figs, which tells you something about the quality of these meetings. On this particular morning, the council debates for an hour about what color cloak the envoy should wear, and 2 hours about what gifts, if any, should be sent. Someone proposes a fine silver goblet, another counters with an ancient shield. Finally, they agree on fruit and wine. If nothing else, it will remind the Greeks of what they are missing by camping outside the city. You hear, through the grapevine, that the Greeks once sent a single old ram as a peace offering, a gesture so cryptic that even the priests could not decipher its meaning. Fact: most diplomatic encounters in Troy's history have ended in confusion or insult. In peacetime, rival traders have been known to challenge each other to wrestling matches after failed negotiations. During war, the stakes are higher, but the tempers are much the same. Some say the gods enjoy the spectacle, others suspect the gods invented negotiation as a kind of divine joke. You watch as the envoys descend from the gate, cloaks trailing in the dust, heads held high. The city's best orator has spent all night rehearsing his speech, polishing each phrase until it shines like new coin. He will open with a poetic insult, soften it with a proverb, and close with a veiled threat. The Greeks, meanwhile, have their own traditions, boasting, posturing, and interrupting the speaker at every opportunity. The two parties meet halfway between wall and camp, close enough that you can see the nervous shifting of feet and the way each side eyes the other's weapons. Words fly, formal, florid, as rehearsed as any festival pageant. You recognize the structure. First, an invocation of the gods to keep up appearances, then a recitation of grievances to satisfy pride. Finally, an offer or a demand, depending on who feels more desperate. On this day, the demands are as predictable as the sunrise. The Greeks want Helen returned, along with a sizable compensation for their trouble. The Trojans, as always, insist on their innocence and offer only vague promises of future friendship. The negotiation quickly devolves into mutual recrimination. Your men raided our coasts, says one. Your princes insulted our king, counters the other. Your ships smell of fish, says a third, and laughter ripples along the Greek lines. The Trojan spokesman responds with a clever couplet about the superiority of Trojan wine, but it is lost in the din. Fact. Real negotiation is mostly noise, an elaborate performance with no intention of success. Both sides already know the outcome. The Greeks will attack. The Trojans will resist. The only question is how much time can be wasted before it happens. Everyone knows this, but the ritual must be observed. It is a comfort in its way, a last chance to pretend that reason might win out over steel. As the sun climbs higher, tempers fray. The Greeks send a second spokesman, rumored to be Odysseus, the cleverest of their leaders. He smiles as he speaks, his voice oily and persuasive. You see some Trojans nod despite themselves. Odysseus could talk a goat out of its own skin. But the king's advisors have been warned about him, and they answer every offer with polite deflection, every threat with measured calm. It is a stalemate, but even stalemate is a kind of progress. The meeting finally ends, not with agreement, but with a formal exchange of insults, each side promising disaster to the other. The envoys walk back to their camps, expressions carefully neutral. In the city, the crowd waits for news, hoping for a miracle, but expecting disappointment. The messenger reports are summarized, debated, and exaggerated until no one can remember what was actually said. You return to your post, and the routine resumes. The soldiers on the wall place bets on how soon the fighting will begin. The market sellers grumble about lost business. The priests organize yet another sacrifice, just in case the gods were not listening yesterday. In the taverns, the jokes begin. Did you hear what the Greeks demanded? They want our walls, our wine, and our women. They can have the walls, but the wine is non-negotiable. Fact. In Troy, as in every city, negotiation is less about peace than about performance. Each speech, each gift, each carefully chosen word is part of the story the city tells itself about its wisdom, its courage, its place in the world. The outcome is always the same, but the ritual matters. It is a brief moment when words, not weapons, shape the future. As evening falls, the wall is quiet again. Somewhere beyond the firelight, the Greeks sharpen their swords and practice their own speeches, just in case tomorrow brings another round of parley. You sit with your comrades, sharing dry bread and stale jokes, waiting for the next stage of the siege to begin. And as the darkness deepens, you realize that nothing in war is as honest as it seems. The real battles are fought in shadows of pride, of memory, of words left unsaid. When the first arrow finally flies, it will not end the negotiation. It will only begin a new chapter in the endless circular argument between those who defend and those who desire. You might imagine, if you listened only to the poets, that life under siege is a swirling storm of terror, a constant tightness in the chest, a trembling of hands. There are nights, certainly, when fear grips you so thoroughly that you nearly laugh from the absurdity of it all. But if you were to be honest, standing up here on Troy's ancient stones, peering out at a sea of Greek tents and flickering campfires, you would confess a stranger truth. Most of the time, fear is just boredom by another name. Every day, you awake to the same sounds. The city crier announcing a shortage of flour, the soft thud of footsteps on the parapet, the whistle of the morning wind slipping between the towers. You dress, you eat your stale bread, you perform your assigned watch. The city's rhythm has not quickened so much as it has deepened, growing heavier and more deliberate with every sunrise. The Greeks remain encamped just outside your reach, as inevitable as the tide, and yet nothing happens. Or rather, everything happens so slowly that it ceases to seem important. Every rumor of a raid fizzles into nothing. Every warning shout is greeted with a groan. Even the captains, once so eager, now conduct their rounds with the weariness of men condemned to wait out eternity. Fact: fear does not arrive as a thunderclap. It drifts, low and subtle, settling into the bones like damp. You see it in the way the market women grip their children's hands, the way the bakers mutter to themselves over the ovens, the way your fellow sentries gaze out at the horizon as if the answer might be written in the clouds. It is not the terror of a charging enemy, but the slow erosion of certainty. At first, everyone is vigilant. Every creak is an intruder, every shout is an alarm, every distant light a potential Greek torch. You spend the early days sleeping in your armor, jumping at the cry of every owl, but the mind cannot live on the edge forever. So you learn to drift, to let your senses blur. The city adopts 1,000 little rituals to cope. Some pray to household gods with greater fervor. Some drink more wine or whatever passes for it. Some make jokes so dark that even the priests blush. Fact: the longer a siege lasts, the more its horror dulls into routine. Fear becomes irritation, irritation becomes habit, and habit becomes a kind of resignation. In the city's alleys, children chase each other through the dust, shouting that they are Greeks or Trojans, depending on who is winning that day in the market gossip. Old men take up positions in the square, debating whether the current siege is worse than the one their fathers endured, always concluding that it is, but only by the thickness of the bread crust. There are those who thrive in this strange atmosphere. The city's gossips become minor celebrities, trading news for bread or favors. The doomsayers, once ignored, are now listened to with a grudging respect. At least they offer something to break the monotony. Even the street dogs sense the shift. They grow bold, parading up and down the boulevards in broad daylight, daring anyone to challenge their authority. Yet for many, the greatest danger is not the Greeks, but the slow sapping of will. Some lose themselves in memories, recalling happier times so often that the present begins to dissolve. Others obsessively polish their armor, sharpen their blades, or invent new ways to count the passing hours. Stones in a pouch, scratches on a wall, lines drawn in the dust. Fact: the mind under siege is a master of invention and self deceit. You learn to see what is not there and to ignore what is. A broken jar becomes an omen. A cloud shaped like a horse is debated for a day in the palace as a sign from the gods. When boredom grows unbearable, even misfortune can feel like a relief. A sudden fire, a public argument, a stray dog stealing a loaf can dominate the city's attention for hours. There are moments when the illusion cracks. A young soldier on the wall admits he is afraid, and the words hang in the air, shocking in their honesty. For a day or two, everyone is quieter, watchful, as if the admission has summoned real danger. Then, inevitably, the city's rhythm reasserts itself, and the moment passes. You notice that courage, like bread, grows stale. The stories you tell yourself in the beginning of glory, of defiance, of clever victory lose their power. You grow suspicious of your own bravado, and the old slogans of resistance ring hollow. You wonder, secretly, what it would feel like to simply give up, to let the city fall and escape the endless waiting. Fact: the enemy is not always the one at your gates. Often, it is the creeping suspicion that nothing matters, that no amount of courage or cleverness will change the outcome. The city's elders call for patience and resolve, but their eyes are tired. Even the priests, so quick with their ceremonies in the first weeks, now mutter the same prayers out of habit, never looking at the sky. You have learned that the bravest act, most days, is simply to persist, to stand your watch, to eat your hard bread, to keep your complaints private. True heroism is surviving the endless, tedious present, refusing to let boredom become surrender. And yet, in rare, quiet moments, you find something resembling hope. Not the loud, brash hope of the epic tales, but a gentler thing, like the faint glow before dawn. It lives in the shared jokes, in the silent companionship of the wall, in the stubbornness of children chasing each other even as the city crumbles. The mind, it seems, is as persistent as the siege itself. As the sun sets, you realize that the greatest legacy of Troy may not be its walls, or its kings, or even its eventual fall, but the peculiar genius of its people to endure what cannot be changed, to greet fear with routine and boredom with a kind of grim, creative humor. There is a peculiar kind of silence that falls just before something important happens. A hush, as if the world itself holds its breath, unsure if this is truly the moment when history will finally wake from its nap. You have been waiting for this moment, or something like it, for what feels like 100 years. The city's patience is stretched thin as the bread, and even thinner than the king's excuses. So when the first arrow finally flies from the walls, it feels almost anticlimactic, more accident than destiny, more the result of a slip or sneeze than of some grand design. Fact. Despite the poets, the opening of a siege is rarely glorious. Most likely, it happens because a nervous archer's hand slips, or a bored sentry grows tired of waiting and decides to try his luck. Sometimes, it is simply that nobody wants to be remembered as the first to back down. Whatever the reason, the arrow leaves the bow with a twang, arcing into the uncertain air between wall and camp, and the world changes in a way that is, at first, almost imperceptible. You do not see the arrow's flight, you hear it. A faint hum, a soft hiss, a startled shout from the Greek camp. It does not find its mark, of course. It never does. There is a saying among the wall guards that your chances of hitting a man at that distance are about as good as convincing a baker to part with an extra loaf. Still, the shot is enough to set everything in motion. The Greeks, long expecting this, answer with a volley of their own, and for the first time, the space between you is filled with more than words and weary stares. The city reacts in stages. First comes a collective gasp. No matter how prepared you are, the actual moment is always a shock. Then the scramble, guards rushing to their positions, officers shouting orders that everyone already knows by heart. The archers notch their arrows, squinting into the sunlight, wondering who will be first to claim a hit. On the wall, everyone pretends not to care, but secretly, each man is watching, hoping, dreading that he will be the next to fire. Fact. In the first minutes of a battle, confusion reigns. Arrows clatter off stone and shields, more dangerous to friend than foe. The Greeks reply with enthusiasm rather than skill, their arrows falling short or veering wildly, as if they, too, are reluctant to start the real killing. Someone on your left looses a shot, and the man beside him follows suit, and soon the wall is a cacophony of twanging strings, nervous jokes, and the shouts of officers trying to establish some kind of order. You remember what the old archers say. The first arrow is for the gods, the second is for your enemy, and the third is just to keep your hands warm. It is a way of making sense of the chaos, of pretending there is a plan when everyone knows that. For now, it is mostly a matter of noise and bravado. The wall becomes a stage, each man playing his part in the ritual, hoping that luck or the gods or sheer numbers will make the difference. Below, the Greeks begin to respond in kind, though they are as disorganized as ever. You watch them scramble for shields, trip over tent ropes, and shout contradictory orders at each other. A captain waves his sword in the air, more for effect than direction, and his men cluster around him like chickens startled by a dog. The famous discipline of the Greek armies turns out, in practice, to be little more than loud shouting and stubbornness. Fact: for every arrow that finds a mark, there are 100 that land in the dirt, stick in a tree, or disappear forever into the weeds. Later, after the noise dies down, scavengers will comb the field, collecting spent shafts to be reused, repurposed, or traded for something more useful, like a decent meal. The city's children make a game of finding the best arrows, comparing their trophies with the seriousness of veteran collectors. As the morning drags on, the excitement wears off, replaced by the dull ache of tension and repetition. The officers shout less and settle in for the long wait. The archers, their arms already sore, rotate off the wall in shifts, grumbling about their luck and the lack of targets. The Greeks, for their part, seem equally uninspired, and the exchange dwindles to a desultory plink of occasional shots, a demonstration of persistence, not aggression, of the first arrow becomes a story, retold with variations that grow wilder with each telling. Some say it was a warning, others that it was meant to signal the gods. Someone claims to know the archer's name, another insists it was a ghost. The city's gossips declare that the arrow was cursed, or blessed, or merely unlucky. By nightfall, the only certainty is that something has changed, though no one can quite say what. Fact: the opening shot is only ever important in hindsight. The poets will someday claim that it signaled the beginning of the end, that the fate of Troy was sealed in that instant. You, standing on the wall, know better. The real work has just begun. The waiting, the watching, the endless grinding labor of holding a city together while hope and rations run thin. You stand your watch, rubbing the sore spot where your armor chafes, and listen as the city settles back into its uneasy routine. Somewhere below, a child cries, a dog barks, and the bakers argue about whose oven has been hit by the stray shaft. The Greeks tend their wounded, real or imagined, and the fires on the plain burn a little brighter, as if to remind you that they are not going anywhere. In the end, it is not the first arrow that matters, but what follows. The persistence to endure, the refusal to give in, the slow accumulation of tiny acts of resistance. The real siege is not fought with arrows or swords, but with the stubbornness of those who refuse to be broken, day after day, night after night, as the war grinds on and the world forgets how it all began. It is well known among the defenders of Troy that the Greeks pride themselves on cleverness, cunning, and invention, though from your perch on the city wall, what you mostly observe is chaos. The Greeks are said to be masters of war, engineers of legend, experts in the arts of siege and destruction. You have heard tales of engines that hurl boulders the size of oxen, towers that rise overnight, and machines so terrifying that even the gods are said to pause and take notes. You see none of this. Instead, you see men arguing over the length of a ladder, a group trying and failing to assemble a rickety wooden frame, and two officers gesturing furiously at a diagram that looks suspiciously upside down. The beach, which should be a crucible of innovation, is more like a carpenter's nightmare. You wonder, not for the first time, if most Greek technology is simply the art of making a simple task appear difficult. Fact: the Greeks' most reliable invention so far has been the ladder. A simple device, to be sure, but one with 1,000 points of failure. You watch them build it again and again, each time discovering a new way to make it less effective, rungs too far apart, uprights warped, supports that splinter under their own weight. More ladders are lost to frustration than to actual combat. You once saw a Greek captain trip over his own ladder, fall face first into the sand, and rise only to blame the gods, his subordinates, and the tree from which the wood was cut. The next marvel is the famed siege tower, rumored to cast a shadow over the walls of Troy. What you see instead is a lumbering contraption on wheels, looking as if a cart, a chicken coop, and a house had collided in a drunken fit of ambition. The tower wobbles across the sand, groaning like an elderly ox, and stops short with a thud. The Greeks stand back and admire it, then realize it is both too tall to pass under the city's outer gate and too short to reach the parapet. You hear laughter ripple along the Trojan wall, the sound carrying well on the morning breeze. Yet, for all your mockery, there is a persistent, gnawing sense of danger. The Greeks are nothing if not persistent. For every failed invention, another takes its place. They try battering rams, logs capped with bronze, dragged up to the gates by teams of shouting men. You see them struggle, mud sucking at their sandals, the ram itself bouncing harmlessly off the gate's stone. Each attempt is met with showers of arrows, shouts of derision, and more often than not, a tactical retreat back to the comfort of their campfires. Fact: for every story of Greek ingenuity, there is a matching story of Greek disaster. You hear from a friend in the city that the Greeks once tried to tunnel under the walls of another city, only to emerge in a pigsty where they were so overcome by the smell that they fled without a fight. The moral, it seems, is that innovation without planning is simply another word for confusion. Still, the Greeks' reputation for trickery lingers like a bad smell. You remember stories of Odysseus, the so called master of schemes, whose name alone is enough to inspire sleepless nights among the older guards. The Greeks might not have invented anything terrifying yet, but everyone in Troy expects that. Sooner or later, they will. The phrase, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, has already been coined, though nobody can quite remember what the last Greek gift actually was. One rumor spreads fast. The Greeks are constructing something new, something secret. Spies in the camp whisper about a great horse, a device so clever and so strange that even the gods have not seen its like. Most of the soldiers dismiss this as drunken boasting. After all, the Greeks can barely keep their tents upright, let alone build wonders of wood and bronze. Still, the suspicion remains, growing in the cracks of the city's confidence. Fact: most Greek technology, so far, is little more than an elaborate show. Their engineers wear fine cloaks, carry silver tools, and speak in riddles, but their inventions rarely survive their first encounter with reality. There is an old saying in Troy: if you want a wall built, ask a Trojan. If you want a story told, ask a Greek. Yet there is always the fear that one day the story will become real. You hear from one of the older soldiers about Greek fire, a substance said to burn even on water, to cling and devour with a heat so fierce it cannot be quenched. The city's children repeat this story, wide eyed and shivering, though nobody can say if it is true or just another invention of the Greeks' busy imaginations. You remember, too, that most fire in the Greek camp comes from their cooking pots, which are forever in danger of exploding. For now, the Greeks rely on numbers and determination. You watch them dig trenches, raise palisades, and practice for assaults that always seem to fizzle into chaos. Their greatest strength, you realize, is not their machines or their cleverness, but their refusal to give up, even when mocked, even when covered in mud, even when their latest invention collapses in a heap of wood and splinters. There is something almost admirable in this persistence, though you would never admit it aloud. You suspect that given enough time, the Greeks might stumble onto a real innovation, not because they are geniuses, but because they never stop trying, never stop failing, never stop reinventing the same battered ladder in hopes that, this time, it will actually work. As night falls and the torches flicker on both sides of the wall, you listen to the distant sounds of hammering, sawing, and arguing from the Greek camp. Somewhere out there, another tower is being built, another ram repaired, another scheme hatched. You tell yourself that it will all come to nothing, that the walls will hold, that Troy's defenders will outlast every Greek invention. Yet in the quiet between sentry rounds, you cannot help but wonder, what if, by sheer accident, the Greeks succeed? What if their next disaster is the one that finally breaks through? You comfort yourself with the knowledge that, for now, the greatest Greek weapon is their own determination, and perhaps your own ability to endure whatever they throw at you, be it arrow, ladder, or absurd wheeled chicken coop. The siege goes on. The Greeks build, the Trojans wait, and somewhere between the failures and the plans, history slowly, inexorably unfolds. If the bards were honest, they would admit that most of a defender's time is not spent in heroic feats, but in the slow grind of ordinary life. You wake before sunrise, not to the trumpet of glory, but to the dull ache of your back and the ceaseless noise of the city, a dog barking at shadows, a baby crying for food, the clang of someone's helmet dropped down a flight of steps. The walls of Troy may be the stuff of legend, but their guardians begin every day with dirty fingernails, sore feet, and a profound longing for a breakfast that does not taste of yesterday's smoke. Your first task is always the same. Make sure your armor is still where you left it. During a siege, nothing is sacred and nothing is safe. Someone, somewhere, is always borrowing a helmet, a pair of greaves, or, most outrageously, a good belt. Once you caught a fellow soldier trying on your sandals by mistake. You never let him forget it. Trust is a precious commodity, usually traded for a fresh fig or a scrap of gossip about the state of the Greek camp. Fact: the romantic image of the shining, orderly phalanx falls apart by the third day of a siege. There is always someone whose shield strap has snapped, someone whose spearhead is loose, someone who insists that his sword was sharper last month. You spend as much time patching and polishing as you do patrolling the parapet. The old veterans boast that in the last siege they repaired their shields with boiled leather and candle wax. You suspect they are exaggerating, but in Troy, resourcefulness is more valuable than strength. The day's rhythm is relentless. You eat your ration, bread, cheese, sometimes olives if you are lucky, while exchanging insults with the men from the other gate. There is a long standing rivalry between the north wall and the east tower, though no one can remember why. The jokes are always the same: who snores loudest, whose watch falls asleep first, whose captain's armor squeaks the most. Laughter is as much a defense as the wall itself. Then the rounds begin. You patrol the battlements, squinting at the Greek camp sprawled across the plain. Sometimes you catch sight of a distant helmet, glinting in the sun, and shout a warning that is mostly ignored. Most of the time, the enemy seems as bored as you are, their own sentries lounging, their officers arguing, their engineers once again trying and failing to get their latest siege engine to stand upright. Fact: the most heated arguments in Troy are not about tactics or honor, but about shields. Everyone claims their shield is the right size, the right thickness, the right decoration. Painted lions, horses, eagles, boars. Each one is a statement, a boast, a silent challenge to fate. Last week there was a near riot when someone accused a fellow of using inferior paint. The argument lasted until nightfall, at which point everyone agreed it was time for soup. You cannot avoid the chores. The catapults need checking, even if they rarely work. The walls need patching, and every so often you must help haul barrels of water up the steep steps, your legs shaking with effort. There is always something broken: rope fraying, a stone out of place, a ladder that creaks suspiciously when climbed. The city may be under threat, but the daily struggle is against entropy itself. And then there are the insects. The poets never mention them, but every defender knows the torment of lice, fleas, and mosquitoes. The nights are worst when the fires are low and every inch of your body itches. There is a legend that the city's first hero, long before the Greeks arrived, surrendered not to an enemy, but to a particularly persistent swarm of gnats. Some evenings, you understand exactly how he felt. Fact: personal hygiene becomes a community affair. Water is rationed, soap is rare, and clean tunics are worth more than gold. There is a bathhouse in the lower city, but the line is so long that you could finish an entire shift on the wall before your turn arrives. The city's cats are respected as fellow defenders. They keep the rat population down, and their haughty indifference is a model for all who hope to survive the siege with dignity. The days are long, the tasks repetitive, the victories small. When you find a dry spot to sleep, when your dinner has more than one ingredient, when you trade a joke that makes even the grumpiest veteran laugh, these are the triumphs that matter. The city's official speeches, full of high flown rhetoric, seem distant and irrelevant. Out here on the wall, camaraderie is forged in sweat and boredom, not in the heat of battle. At sunset, the city changes. Fires flicker along the ramparts, voices soften, and the first songs drift up from the houses below. Some sing prayers, others old war ballads, a few improvising rude verses about Greek incompetence. You sit with your comrades, sharing the day's complaints and whatever scraps are left from supper. Someone pulls out a bone flute, and for a moment, the city feels whole, ordinary, even peaceful despite the siege. You fall asleep to the sounds of breathing, snoring, and the distant, ever present mutter of the city at war. The stars spin slowly overhead, and you dream not of victory, but of clean sheets and sweet bread. In the morning, it will begin again. The daily life of a defender, equal parts frustration, exhaustion, and stubborn pride. Fact: history remembers heroes, but cities survive because ordinary people do ordinary things over and over, without glory, without rest, and with just enough humor to see another day. Panic, you learn, is a many headed beast in a city under siege. It does not appear all at once in a single stampede or a midnight scream. No, panic in Troy seeps up from the cracks, rides the wind like dust, slips beneath doors and through shuttered windows, settling over the population until everyone is jumpy and irritable, prone to arguing over nothing and everything. Some days, panic is so thick in the air, you could scoop it into a bowl and offer it as soup. Other days, it is almost invisible, a faint itch in the mind, a quiver in the hands, a quiet dread behind every conversation. You first notice it on the wall when a sentry swears he saw a sign in the sky, a red cloud shaped like a wolf. Within an hour, half the garrison is whispering about omens. Someone claims to have seen the same wolf in a puddle. Another says it was not a wolf, but a ship. By sunset, the wolf cloud is a full grown legend with teeth sharper than any Greek blade. Fact: nothing spreads faster than panic, except maybe a good rumor. In Troy, rumors are both a pastime and a survival strategy. With nothing to do but wait and worry, the city's residents become expert storytellers. You hear tales of secret tunnels under the walls, of traders in the market, of gods spotted in disguise among the bakers. There are whispers that the king's daughter has vanished, that the high priest has been bribed, that someone has poisoned the wells. Each new story sparks a fresh round of speculation, accusation, and half hearted investigation. Fact: the city's real leaders are not the council or the king, but the women who gather at the wells and the men who linger by the gates. They trade news, sift through exaggerations, and decide which rumors to believe, which to spread, and which to let die. A well placed word from an old woman can send a family into hiding or a merchant running to the palace with a bribe. It is the unseen web that holds the city together or tears it apart. One morning, the city wakes to the rumor that the Greeks have found a way in. Someone claims to have heard digging beneath their cellar. Another swears the Greeks are building a flying machine. For an hour, the streets buzz with fear. Children are kept inside, shops close, and even the bravest men avoid the shadowy alleys. By noon, the truth emerges. The digging was a rat, and the flying machine was a drunken soldier who fell off the wall. The panic subsides, replaced by laughter and relief, but the city's nerves remain raw. You see the effects everywhere. The baker refuses to sell breads to strangers. The smith demands payment in advance. Friends eye each other with suspicion. Old quarrels flare up over imagined slights. A missing dog becomes evidence of espionage. The smallest mishap, a dropped amphora, a late delivery of onions, can ignite a storm of blame. The priests hold extra sacrifices, just in case, and the fortune tellers do a brisk business interpreting dreams that, for some reason, all involve falling or drowning. Fact, panic can be useful. The city's leaders, when faced with real problems, like a shortage of water or a breach in the outer wall, sometimes leak a minor rumor to distract the population. A fake sighting of a Greek spy or a wild animal can keep people occupied for days while repairs are made in secret. The art of governance, you realize, is not so different from the art of rumor mongering. Both rely on timing, misdirection, and knowing when to let the story fade. Still, panic can turn ugly. Late one night, a brawl breaks out in the market square. Someone accuses a neighbor of hoarding flour. Others join in, and soon fists fly. The city guard arrives too late to prevent a broken nose and a shattered jar of honey. The next morning, the story has already changed. The brawl was not about flour, but about a love affair, or a stolen chicken, or a prophecy misunderstood. The truth, if there ever was one, is buried beneath layers of gossip. There are moments, too, when the city teeters on the edge of real chaos. The memory of other cities, sacked and burned, hovers in the background of every conversation. You see it in the way people gather their valuables, the way mothers watch the gates, the way the old men sharpen sticks, just in case. There is a list, kept secretly in the palace, of which families will be let onto the ships if the worst should happen. No one knows who is on the list, but everyone suspects it is not them. Fact, in times of crisis, rumor becomes prophecy. A single word can tip the balance from calm to frenzy. You hear of a night when the city's dogs all howled at once, and for a week no one slept easy. Another time, a flock of birds flew the wrong way over the city, and the next day the market was deserted. The mind, you realize, is a fragile wall, easier to breach than any stonework. As the days pass, the rumors grow wilder, the panic more subtle. People learn to hide their fear behind jokes, behind sarcasm, behind endless talk. Some embrace superstition, wearing charms and reciting spells. Others insist that nothing is wrong, that the Greeks will soon tire and go home. The truth, you suspect, is somewhere in between. The city will endure, but only if it can keep its head while its heart races. At sunset, as the shadows lengthen and the city quiets, you think of all the things that have not happened. The walls have not fallen, the enemy has not broken through, the gods have not sent any new disasters. The real threat, you realize, is not outside the city, but inside, growing with every whispered story, every sideways glance, every moment of uncertainty. You tell yourself that tomorrow will be better, but even as you do, you wonder what new panic the dawn will bring. And as you settle in for another uneasy night, you marvel at the city's resilience, not its walls or its weapons, but its astonishing, persistent ability to believe anything, endure anything, and still somehow find a way to laugh at the madness of it. All, every city under siege becomes a factory for myths. Troy, of course, is no exception. The stories grow and mutate each night, fed by boredom, hope, and a relentless need to make sense of what no one understands. You, standing on the wall, soon realize that for every real event in this war, there are a dozen tales circulating below, some outlandish, some suspiciously flattering to the city's defenders, and a few so grim that even the bravest soldiers prefer not to repeat them after dark. Fact: the myth of the hero is far easier to sustain than the hero himself. Take, for example, the tale of Antenor's son, who is said to have slain 100 Greeks with a single sweep of his sword. The truth? He tripped over a tent rope, fell on his own spear, and spent the rest of the day swearing at the gods while his friends rescued him. By evening, the story had become a rousing ballad performed in the square, and Antenor's son could not cross the street without someone begging to touch the hem of his tunic for luck. There is comfort in myth. It makes the chaos manageable, carves order from confusion, and flatters everyone into believing that their part in the great story is significant. Mothers tell children that the city is protected by the favor of Apollo, that no Greek spear can pierce the walls, that the gods themselves dine in Troy's halls by night. The children repeat these tales with wide eyes and sticky fingers, never doubting for a moment that the world is shaped by magic and destiny. Yet you, who see the walls' cracks and the nervous faces of the centuries, understand that reality is less poetic. Most heroics are accidents, acts of fatigue, hunger, or simple fear. The archer who killed 2 Greeks in a single morning did so because his bowstring snapped and sent the arrow wild. The warrior who leapt from the parapet to save a comrade actually slipped on pigeon droppings and landed in the enemy's lap. These stories, too, circulate, but they are quickly replaced by more satisfying versions. The city, it seems, prefers its legends polished. Fact: even suffering becomes myth. There are tales of heroes enduring days without food, fighting on with wounds that should have killed them, smiling as they die. The reality, as you well know, is less dignified. Hunger gnaws at everyone, wounds fester and stink, and men die with curses on their lips, not hymns. It is not that courage is absent, courage is everywhere, but it rarely looks the way the stories promise. More often, it is the quiet, stubborn act of getting up each morning, putting on battered armor and doing the same tiresome things until night falls again. You have heard about the gods walking the earth, disguised as beggars or cats or visiting priests. Supposedly, Athena herself argued with the king in the council hall last week. You were not there, but everyone swears it happened. Even the king, when pressed, smiles mysteriously and neither confirms nor denies. Fact: when uncertainty reigns, a little divine intervention can be reassuring. It gives people the sense that the city's fate is not entirely in mortal hands. There are darker myths, too, the kind people whisper only when the fires are low. Stories of prophecies ignored, of curses placed on the city by jealous gods, of betrayals yet to be uncovered. Some claim that Troy's doom is sealed because of a single broken promise, a forgotten sacrifice, or a sin committed generations ago. Others say the Greeks have a secret weapon forged by Hephaestus himself that will bring the walls down in a night. With each retelling, the stories grow more elaborate and less tethered to anything real. You notice how easily these myths become a kind of currency. Soldiers bargain over who can tell the most terrifying or inspiring tale. Merchants use stories to justify high prices. This wine is from the very vine that Dionysus blessed. That is why it costs 3 times as much. Children use them to scare each other into silence. Even the council listens to the latest rumor before making any decision, as if wisdom can be found by weighing the stories for or against action. Fact: the line between myth and reality is not just blurry, it is irrelevant. In Siege, belief becomes its own form of truth. If the people believe Apollo protects them, then, for a little while, he does. If the city believes the Greeks are cursed, the defenders fight harder. If a single archer is believed to be invincible, then his presence on the wall inspires everyone around him, even if he spends most of his time hiding behind a shield and praying for the rain to start. You sometimes wonder how these myths will outlast you. Will the next generation believe that Troy fell because of treachery, or because the gods abandoned her, or because a wooden horse carried death inside the gates? Will anyone remember the smell of stale bread, the boredom, the squabbles over water, the endless repairs? Or will the story be pared down to a few shining names, a handful of bloody days, and a single dramatic ending? The answer does not matter. Not really. You find a kind of peace in the knowledge that the truth of your days, with all their mess and misery, will be polished into something brighter, something worth singing about, long after you are gone. Perhaps, in the end, that is all anyone can ask from a siege, that reality be endured and the story remembered. And as the night grows quiet and the stars emerge over the battered city, you settle back against the wall and listen to the latest tale making the rounds, a tale in which you, apparently, single handedly turned back a Greek assault with nothing but your shield and a scowl. You do not correct the teller. Myths, after all, are easier to live with than reality. There are days in Troy's long siege that slip from memory almost as soon as they end. These are not the days when the enemy charges the wall or the city council make some doomed proclamation. No, the days that truly haunt you are the ones when absolutely nothing happens, when the world stands still, caught in the dull throb of routine, and every hour feels like an echo of the last. Today is such a day. You wake up to the same pale light creeping across the barracks floor, the same chorus of yawns and grumbling, the same weak stew for breakfast. There are no alarms, no urgent shouts, no messengers dashing up the stairs to announce a new disaster or a fresh negotiation. Instead, there is the slow, grinding monotony of watch rotations, kitchen duties, and wall patrols. Fact: the most dangerous days of a siege are not the violent ones, but the days when tedium eats away at the city's soul. When action is replaced by waiting, everyone becomes an amateur philosopher or a professional complainer. The officers pace the walls with nothing to say. The archers check and recheck their arrows, then sit and watch the clouds. Someone tries to start a game of dice, but even that loses its appeal after the third round of accusations about cheating. The Greeks are just as quiet. From your vantage point on the wall, you can see them milling about their camp, poking at their fires and arguing over fish or water or whatever small misery has risen to the surface today. Their sentries are slouched in their watchtowers, their engineers poking listlessly at the skeleton of yet another failed siege engine. It seems even the gods have grown bored with this war. There are no signs, no omens, not even a stray thunderstorm to give the priests something to talk about. In the city below, life slows to a crawl. The marketplace opens late and closes early. The children, usually loud and irrepressible, are oddly subdued, kicking pebbles instead of chasing dogs. The women at the well exchange only the briefest gossip, as if saving their voices for a more dramatic day. In the palace, the council holds another endless meeting, debating the exact same points they debated yesterday. Should they ration oil more strictly, or make a new sacrifice to Apollo, or try one last time to send a message through the Greek lines? Fact: on days like this, every small annoyance becomes a crisis. The bread is too hard, the soup is too thin, the water tastes of old clay. A soldier complains that his shield has a crack, and suddenly half the barracks is inspecting their own gear for imaginary flaws. Even the pigeons seem irritated, squabbling over crumbs on the rooftops with more energy than any human in the city. You find yourself drifting into memories, replaying the first days of the siege when every hour brought something new: panic, hope, fear, bravado. Now those feelings are worn thin, and what remains is a peculiar numbness. You polish your sword, not because you expect to use it, but because the act itself passes time. You tell yourself jokes you have already told, laugh at stories you no longer find funny, and count the bricks in the parapet for the 100th time. The poets never write about these days. There is no glory in endurance, no song in repetition. But as you watch your comrades, some napping in the sun, others patching their sandals, a few humming half remembered tunes, you realize that this is what siege life truly is: the slow, stubborn refusal to give in to despair or madness. If there is any heroism to be found, it lies in surviving the boredom without letting it rot you from the inside out. Fact, even the bravest grow restless. The young men talk about escape, about sneaking over the walls and vanishing into the countryside. The older ones remember other sieges, other long waits, and shake their heads. There is nowhere to go that is not under someone else's shadow. The real test is not how long you can hold a sword, but how long you can hold your patience. By midday, the only excitement is an argument about whose turn it is to clean the latrines. The dispute lasts nearly an hour, drawing in half the squad, and ends only when the captain threatens to make everyone do it if they cannot settle things themselves. For a brief moment, tempers flare. Then, just as suddenly, they subside. The world returns to its endless gray lull. As the afternoon drags on, the light grows slant and golden. You stare at the Greek camp and try to imagine what they are thinking. Are they bored too? Do they sit around the fires and grumble about the food, the weather, the lack of action? Is there a young man among them, peering at the walls of Troy and counting the days, just as you do? For a heartbeat, the enemy seems less like a threat and more like a mirror, reflecting your own restless hunger for something, anything, to change. The sun begins to set, painting the city in tired shades of orange and red. The bells toll, marking another day's end, and the city's routines resume. The evening meal, the prayers to gods who seem more absent with each passing day, the slow winding down of voices as darkness gathers. You climb down from the wall, legs heavy, mind empty, and join your comrades around the hearth. Fact, the days without events are, in their own way, the hardest to survive. Action may bring danger, but it also brings purpose. Boredom leaves you with nothing but yourself, your fears, your doubts, your memories. Still, you endure. The city endures. Tomorrow, perhaps, the world will change. And as you close your eyes and surrender to the stillness, you realize that this, too, will become part of the story. One more quiet day in a siege defined not by battles, but by the relentless, invisible labor of simply continuing on. The siege, you soon discover, is not just a contest of weapons and will. It is a long, drawn out debate between the better and the worse parts of every soul in Troy. The old stories would have you believe that moral choices are clear: heroism or cowardice, loyalty or betrayal, honor or disgrace. But in reality, siege life turns every question into a quagmire, and even the simplest decision is covered with mud. You see it first in the little things. A friend, tired and thin, contemplates whether to keep his best loaf for himself or share it with a neighbor who has less. Someone else, cornered by debt and hunger, considers selling his father's old helmet for a few onions and a cup of wine. In the long, silent nights, you lie awake and wonder whether you would do the same. Would you choose loyalty to your kin or to your city or simply to your stomach? When is it wise to bend the rules? And when is it a slippery slope to ruin? Fact. In siege, virtue is a luxury. The market for stolen goods thrives in the shadows. A sentry trades his share of oil for a promise of extra rations. A baker secretly waters his dough to stretch his flour. In public, everyone condemns such acts. In private, many quietly benefit. Hypocrisy becomes another kind of currency, exchanged as often as silver. The commanders face their own crises. You watch as your captain struggles to decide who will be assigned the least desirable watch. Is it fair to punish the lazy, or should the strongest carry the heaviest burden? When supplies run low, should food go to the children and the old, or to the strongest warriors? In the council chamber, the debates grow heated, but in the end, there are no right answers, only decisions that leave someone angry or afraid. Fact. Desertion becomes an ever present temptation. Some speak of slipping away at night, of finding safety in the hills, of starting anew where the Greeks cannot follow. The elders shake their heads and mutter about loyalty, but even the youngest recognize the scent of desperation. You recall a night when one of your own disappeared, no trace but a missing helmet, and a rumor that he had joined a band of outlaws in the woods. The city mourned, but quietly envied him for his escape. Beneath it all, the question of trust gnaws at the bones of the city. Can you trust the man beside you to stand his ground if the wall is breached? Can you trust the council not to flee on the last ship if the city falls? You overhear a group of soldiers debating whether the king's promises mean anything now, or if everyone is simply waiting for someone else to make the first move. Moral dilemmas, you learn, are not only for leaders and heroes. Every citizen faces them in the small, grinding decisions of daily survival. A mother who steals a little grain from her neighbor's storehouse. A merchant who lies about the weight of his goods. A priest who claims a vision to calm a frightened crowd, even though the gods have long been silent. Each act chips away at the city's soul, but each is also, in its own way, understandable. Fact. There is a quiet bravery in those who refuse to give in to despair. The soldier who shares his last crust with a comrade. The guard who volunteers for an extra shift so a friend can rest. The young girl who gives her only blanket to a neighbor's newborn. These stories do not become songs or myths, but they keep the city from unraveling completely. Yet not all dilemmas are noble. Sometimes the worst choices come from fear. You hear stories of spies turned in by jealous neighbors, of scapegoats offered up to placate the mob. When food is scarce, people look for someone to blame. One night, you witness an argument spiral into violence over a missing jug of oil. In the morning, both men are gone from the barracks, and no one speaks of it again. As the siege drags on, lines blur further. The priest blesses diluted wine and calls it holy. The merchant passes off last year's beans as this year's harvest. The officer who once insisted on strict discipline now closes his eyes to a few hours of stolen sleep. You start to wonder if, in the end, survival is its own kind of morality, if doing what it takes to live is the only commandment that matters. Fact: the real heroes are not the ones who shout the loudest about honor. They are the ones who quietly, stubbornly do what needs to be done, who carry water, share their food, hold the line, and mend the cracks in the wall and in the city's spirit. Their names are rarely sung, but their choices shape the city's fate. On the wall at dusk, you look down at the city and see 1,000 silent debates playing out: to share or to hoard, to speak or to hide, to fight or to flee. You realize that the siege is less a contest of armies than a contest of values, an endless balancing act between hope and hunger, kindness and caution, fear and resolve. As night falls and the torches flicker along the battlements, you tell yourself that you will do the right thing when the moment comes. But in your heart, you know the truth. In siege, the right thing is rarely clear, and even the best intentions must be measured against the cruel arithmetic of survival. If the poets ever truly wanted to frighten a city under siege, they would not write about swords, fire, or the wrath of vengeful gods. They would write about coughs in the night, about fever dreams, about the quiet terror that spreads through crowded streets and close packed barracks when a single sneeze is heard above the hum of voices. For in Troy, as in any besieged city, it is not the Greek spear that claims the most victims, but the invisible hand of disease. The first hint comes quietly. A soldier on the north wall complains of chills, then vanishes from his post for a day. No one thinks much of it. There are always fevers, always coughs, always someone shivering under a thin blanket. But soon there are more. A child in the market who cannot rise from her bed, a baker's wife who coughs blood onto her apron, an old man whose voice rattles like dry leaves. The rumors begin long before any official announcement. A new sickness, a plague, a curse sent by jealous gods or enemy spies. Fact: ancient medicine is an art of hope, guesswork, and charm, practiced with the same tools used to mend sandals or flavor stew. The city's physicians are called healers, but their remedies are as likely to worsen as to cure. Garlic, honey, vinegar, burnt onions, ashes from sacred fires, everything is tried and nothing is certain. The healers argue endlessly over the best treatments. Should the sick be bled or fed? Is the cure in the roots of the mountain lily or in the liver of a sacrificed goat? Should wounds be covered or left to the healing air? If there is consensus, it is only that something must always be done, even if it does no good. The city council convenes in alarm. The priests declare more sacrifices, just in case the gods are insulted. Scribes dig out dusty records of previous plagues, searching for a pattern, a sign, a forgotten prayer that might turn back the tide. The common people whisper that the Greeks have poisoned the wells. At least one merchant begins selling blessed water at 3 times the normal price and is promptly robbed by a desperate crowd. You see the city's mood sour, panic mixing with exhaustion. The gates are shut tighter, families keep to themselves, sharing food and gossip, but not company. The markets are quieter, the laughter gone. Even the children play less. their games growing subdued as mothers call them home at the first hint of a cough. Fact: most healers are more feared than loved. The physician in your quarter is an old woman named Phaedra, who smells of vinegar and onion and insists that all illness can be driven out with hot bread and cold wine. Her visits are dreaded. Her remedies include poultices made from moldy bread, baths in icy water, and the ritual burning of goat hair. Yet, when fever strikes, even the most skeptical beg for her help. You recall a saying: the gods send disease, but only mortals charge for the cure. Some prefer their own remedies. One man swears by onions hung at every door. Another recommends sleeping with a bronze coin under the tongue. The soldiers try drinking wine until they can no longer remember what ails them. The old women make infusions of anything that grows on the city's walls: nettles, fennel, wild garlic, then mutter incantations as the pot simmers. There is little agreement, except that everyone is an expert and everyone is secretly afraid. Death, of course, is not new to Troy, but epidemic death is different, slower, more insidious, and harder to fight. The dead are buried quickly, sometimes without ceremony, the funerals hurried and somber. The city grows used to the sound of weeping at dawn and the sight of processions moving quietly through deserted streets. No one lingers near the sick. Fear turns to resentment, and resentment to silence. Fact: sometimes the disease strikes the Greek camp as well. Word comes that the enemy is also suffering. Rows of tents marked with painted symbols, whole companies unable to fight. For a brief, guilty moment, the city feels a measure of comfort in shared misery. There is talk that the gods are punishing both sides, or perhaps simply bored with the whole affair. The physicians argue for isolation, but Troy is too crowded, too anxious, too poor in space and patience. One section of the lower city is set aside for the worst cases. No one wishes to enter, and those who do are shunned until the siege ends, or until they, too, are claimed by the sickness. Amidst it all, there are moments of dark humor. The guards joke that the plague is part of the Greek plan. If they cannot storm the walls, they will cough us to death. The bakers claim their bread is so hard, no disease could survive in it. The wine merchants suggest that more drinking will keep everyone safe. The council, lacking better ideas, approves more wine for the troops. The priests bless the barrels, just in case. Fact: the city's memory is long, but not always wise. Each epidemic is remembered as the worst, each physician as a fraud or a saint, depending on who survives. By the end of each wave, the old remedies are forgotten and the cycle begins again. In the face of death, people cling to what comforts they can: prayer, old songs, stories of miraculous recoveries. Hope, it seems, is the best medicine, even if it is the rarest. You stand on the wall and watch the city below, alive with worry. You wonder if the siege will end before the sickness, or if Troy will endure only to find itself empty and broken when the enemy finally leaves. You remember the faces of friends lost, the prayers whispered by desperate families, the stubborn faith that tomorrow, somehow, will be better. As the sun sets, the city's healers light their lamps, and the smell of burnt onions drifts through the streets. The sick sleep uneasily, the well pray for luck, and the defenders of Troy keep their lonely watch, knowing that, for now, the greatest threat is not the Greeks or the gods, but the ancient, patient enemy that comes with every war, the invisible shadow of disease. If you stand long enough on the walls of Troy, staring at the horizon until your eyes ache, you might begin to suspect that the gods are watching you, or rather, that they are not watching you at all. The priests, robed and perfumed, chant daily about the gods' favor, and the altars in every square overflow with offerings: burnt barley, a few onions, the choicest cut of mutton when it can be spared. Yet as the siege drags into its endless months, you cannot escape the growing suspicion that Olympus has lost interest. Fact, the city has prayed to every god it can name, and a few it has invented for the occasion. Every disaster is a sign, every moment of reprieve a blessing, every ill omen dissected by the city's fortune tellers until there is nothing left but confusion. Yet, with each unanswered prayer, each sacrifice that brings only silence, the mood shifts from hope to resentment, from faith to a sullen, sarcastic sort of fatalism. You hear it in the grumbling of the old guards on the wall. Ares is too busy chasing Aphrodite to bother with us. Apollo must be writing a new song, certainly not watching the Greeks. The younger priests try to inspire with tales of heroic gods fighting alongside mortals, but even the children roll their eyes. It is a peculiar comfort to think that the gods are distracted. If you are not punished, perhaps you will not be noticed at all. Fact, the real power in Troy is not the presence of the divine, but its absence. For every festival there is a whisper. Why have the gods not ended this siege? For every new statue raised, there are jokes about which deity might actually remember the city's name. You see the gods everywhere in Troy, on coins, in graffiti, painted on the shields of captains, but nowhere do you feel their presence less than during these dark, watchful nights. The priests grow anxious. Each new failure, a failed sortie, a sudden storm, a spoiled batch of bread, is explained away as a test, or as the result of some forgotten slight. Remember the sacrifice, the high priest cries. Remember the promises we made. But it becomes harder to remember what was promised and what was merely hoped for. The rituals multiply. Each day, a new set of incantations, a new set of forbidden foods, a new warning against angering this or that minor god. In secret, the city's philosophers mock the entire spectacle. If the gods cared, one says, the Greeks would have sunk in their own stupidity long ago. Another mutters that perhaps the gods are betting against both sides for their own amusement. A third says nothing, but stares at the sacrificial flames with an expression you cannot read, part longing, part resignation. Fact, in times of peace, the gods are present in every blessing and every curse. In war, they become distant, abstract ideas, vague hopes, sometimes useful scapegoats. You watch the priests grow gaunt and desperate, their voices hoarse from pleading. You see how people leave fewer and fewer offerings, how the market women stop pausing at the shrines, how even the most superstitious begin to hedge their bets. May Apollo help us if he is listening. A curious thing happens when the city realizes it has been left on its own. People stop waiting for miracles. Instead, they turn to each other quietly, without speeches or ceremonies. A neighbor brings soup to the sick. A guard volunteers for a double shift. The children invent new games to pass the empty afternoons. You see less prayer and more kindness, less hope for divine rescue, and more acceptance that survival is a matter of human stubbornness and luck. Fact: the gods are blamed for every misfortune and thanked for every scrap of good luck, but fewer and fewer truly believe they are listening. Even the king, who once made sacrifices with great fanfare, now mutters his prayers behind closed doors. The city's festivals shrink in scale. The songs become less about the glory of the gods and more about the cleverness of mortals, the resilience of the city, the small joys found even in the shadow of disaster. You are not sure when you stopped expecting a sign. Perhaps it was the night when lightning struck outside the walls and nothing happened, or the day the bread ran out and no sudden miracle filled the storehouses. The absence of the divine has become a kind of company, a silent companion on the wall, sharing your doubts, your frustrations, your defiant laughter. And yet, there are moments when the old faith stirs, a rainbow after a storm, a dream that brings comfort, a whisper in the night that sounds like a promise. In those moments, you almost believe again. Almost. But in the end, you return to your watch, to the battered stones, to the city that survives by its own grit. Fact: history will say the gods chose sides in the war for Troy, but those who stood the walls and walked the ruined streets will remember something different: the cold comfort of indifference, and the quiet strength found when mortals accept that the gods, if they are watching, have left them to write their own story. As you lean against the ancient parapet, gazing out at the silent plain where the Greeks still wait, you find a strange solace in that realization. Perhaps indifference is not the same as abandonment. Perhaps, in being left alone, the city has finally discovered what it means to be truly alive. Dawn comes quietly, as it always does, creeping over the battered walls and the ruined roofs, laying a pale hand on the sleeping city. You stand on the parapet, as you have so many mornings before, your cloak wrapped tightly against the chill. Below, Troy lies silent and tense, a city suspended between hope and surrender, waiting for something, anything, to break the spell of endless siege. Today, though, is not like other days. Today, there is a feeling that something must end. The sky is strange, streaked with purple and gold. Smoke from last night's fires hangs low over the city, and every sound, a door closing, a dog barking, footsteps on stone, seems sharper, more significant. The guards on the wall stand a little straighter. The old men at the gates mutter and gesture nervously. Even the birds fly differently, as if uncertain of their place in this world. Fact: on the eve of great events, most people are occupied not with heroics, but with small, urgent things. You watch mothers gather their children, stuffing bits of bread and keepsakes into cloth bundles just in case. Merchants take final stock of their goods, counting coins they may never spend. The council meets, not to make decisions, but to offer each other what comfort and courage they can still muster. The priests light a dozen fires, their prayers louder and faster than ever, but the gods remain silent as stone. You chew the last crust of your ration, stale and hard, and think not of glory or vengeance, but of practical matters, where the water barrels stand, where the ladders lean, whether the spare pile of stones is high enough. Heroism, you realize, is mostly logistics. The most celebrated warriors will spend the morning arguing about who guards which gate, who gets the last helmet that does not pinch, who should fetch the missing arrows from the storeroom. Below, the city prepares for what everyone suspects is coming. Some speak of negotiations, others of a final assault, a few of surrender. The truth is, no one knows. Rumors pass like birds from roof to roof. The Greeks have a new engine. The king is planning to flee. A secret tunnel has been discovered. The walls will be breached by nightfall. The gods will descend at the last moment and save the city. Each story is more desperate than the last, but everyone listens. When you have nothing left but stories, you cling to them like driftwood. Fact: the closer you are to catastrophe, the more the world narrows. Time seems to bend. Hours feel like minutes, then stretch into lifetimes. The city's children are quieter, clinging to their mothers' skirts. Old soldiers sharpen their swords with trembling hands. Even the animals seem subdued, as if waiting for their part in the drama. You find yourself counting your own breaths, watching the play of light on the wall, rehearsing, again, the words you might say if the gates finally fall. It is said that in the moment before the end, a kind of clarity descends. You see it now in the faces of those around you, a recognition that this is the story's turning point, that what comes next will be retold by 1,000 voices, each with its own embellishments and regrets. You remember the old myths, the promises of immortality, the songs about dying bravely. But the only immortality that matters now is whether someone will remember your name, or whether, in the chaos to come, you will vanish into the city's dust like so many others. You stand your watch as the sun creeps higher, glinting on the battered bronze of helmets and the tired faces of your friends. A final meal is shared, a crust of bread, a sip of sour wine, a joke so old it has become a kind of prayer. Laughter, thin but real, drifts across the parapet. You tell yourself that if this is the last dawn, you will greet it not with fear, but with stubborn pride. Fact: the true test is not in how you fight, but in how you endure. You have endured hunger, boredom, panic, hope, and disappointment. You have watched the city shrink and fade, watched the gods grow silent, watched friends vanish into the fog of rumor and death. And yet, you are still here, still standing, still ready for whatever comes next, even if it is only the certainty of your own small part in a much larger story. As the Greek camp stirs on the plain, banners lifting in the breeze, a trumpet call breaks the silence. You feel the city tense, every muscle drawn tight. The moment is here. You breathe deeply, tasting the air, smoke, sweat, fear, and the faint sweetness of spring that somehow, impossibly, has not been driven away. You close your eyes for just a second, remembering all the mornings that led to this one. The endless drills, the sour jokes, the taste of old bread, the weight of your armor, the sound of your own heart beating faster as the city wakes to its fate. You wonder if you will live to see another dawn, or if your name will be one of the many lost to the dust. The sun rises, bright and cold, and you square your shoulders as the city takes its last breath before the storm. Whether Troy stands or falls, whether your part in the tale is sung or forgotten, you know this. You have seen the world at its edge, and you have not turned away. And as the Greek trumpets call again, echoing over the plain, you tighten your grip on your spear and step forward into the story, whatever it may bring.